Ulavinaka and welcome to For the Record. Tonight we come to you from Nandi, where the Fiji First political movement launched its manifesto 2 days ago. And to speak about the manifesto and the policies, the visions and the strategies of Fiji First, in studio with us tonight is the General Secretary of the party, Mr. A.S. Syed Qayyum. And on our panel is the senior multimedia journalist for FBC News, Christopher Chand. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being on the show. Mr. Syed Qayyum, Chris, thank you. We'll get right into it. Releasing the manifesto so close to the elections, Friday, was there some tactic behind this?
Well, in fact, if you look at it, the Bainimarama government obviously has had a track record, and as the Prime Minister has said on a number of occasions, that the manifesto would not be anything that's completely different. In fact, it builds upon the already existing policies of the Bainimarama government. So there was no specific strategy per se, but essentially most people knew about what the Bainimarama government has done, and we've already said, as our leader has said, we'll continue to build upon that. The manifesto, of course, fine-tuned some of the existing policies, but the same philosophy follows through.
Do you suspect it might be a bit too late to actually launch a manifesto with, as of tonight, 10 days to go?
Not necessarily. I mean, obviously we need to get the information out to members of the public, and we will be doing that through using your organization and other media organizations. And we obviously are talking about that in our campaign meetings, pocket meetings that we're holding throughout Fiji. But again, like I said, it's most people know exactly what we're doing. There's obviously some new initiatives that have been brought in, and that we obviously need to make it known to the public. But we believe there's enough time for them to understand what has happened and what will be happening.
What would you say or boast is one of the highlights for the policies that you're introducing in the manifesto?
Well, to be frank, I think all of them are quite significant. Obviously, things like milk for the children is something a lot of parents like, a lot of children like. And in fact, if you look at countries like Australia, they used to do that back in the 1970s. Because it's a health issue also, and creating healthy minds. But there are obviously other attractive things like the cost of living. But for some people, for example, workers' compensation is very important. Third-party insurance is very important. So we believe all the aspects of it is actually quite significant. In fact, one of the initiatives that we have announced about setting aside $10 million to help the Itauke people get into land development themselves, a lot of people have applauded that. Because for a very long period of time, the Itauke people don't actually get into land development themselves. What happens is you may come along as an investor, lease 100 acres of land, and at a relatively reasonable or low rate, and then you go off and subdivide it, make the money, make the cream, as the landowners don't. So this is to encourage the landowners to do the development themselves. So sometimes you'll see that they're very asset rich, of course, they may be cash poor. So if a group of landowners want to develop their land, maybe close to the airport or close to a residential area, they may not have all the upfront money, for example, to put in a transformer for electricity. It may cost $800,000–900,000. So there's in fact a land here near Nandi Airport. For a long period of time, this landowner had developed it, but it in fact did not get passed by the local councils because it did not have access to electricity. Nobody was buying it. So he in fact had to forego that. So by giving them this facility, they can feel confident saying, okay, we have this cash supply. Of course, they need to have a good business plan, land development plan, and we will provide them that money as a grant. So they get into the business of also leasing out land themselves by developing it themselves. So they feel confident about it. And we, of course, with such an asset that they have, they can get cash rich also.
AG, you mentioned, I think the highlight would probably be, as you mentioned, is providing 250 ml of milk every day to children in class 1 starting from term 1 next year. Government set aside $2.5 million for this. Did the Fiji First Party consider probably looking at providing free textbooks or sandals or uniforms?
Well, we have free textbooks at the moment, not free exercise books, but we have free textbooks. But this is more of an issue of looking at, it's a supply issue. And now milk, as you know, it's homogenized, so the durability is there. So you can send the packs out to Yasawa, to Lau Group, or Tuma, and the supply will be there. The logistics, for example, of doing some of the other things in terms of sandals, uniforms, is a bit more difficult. This is a lot more easier, but it also has another angle to it, which is the health issue. Because a lot of children may not necessarily get good calcium levels in their diet at home, and it helps people, in particular lower end of the socioeconomic scale, to be able to have their children get access to calcium. And it also, of course, encourages a healthy lifestyle. We want them to start drinking milk as opposed to Coca-Cola, or Sprint, or whatever the drink may be. So that's the rationale behind it.
Mr. Syed Qayyum, from the manifesto, it says that you've budgeted 2.5 million, and there have been discussions with Fiji Dairy. Two questions. Firstly, milk supply in Fiji is already difficult. 70 million litres consumed every year, but we only produce 10 million litres. We already have a supply issue. So are we compounding that by coming up with this initiative? And secondly, how many children do you expect to cover on a yearly basis?
Okay, no, we're not compounding the milk supply. That's why we've been in discussions with them. They can meet those demands. We do drink about 77 million litres of milk a year. We produce about 10 million. And we meet the shortfall by importing powdered milk from New Zealand to make the shortfall. So we've done the pricing sitting down with them because they're the only local processors of milk. And they can cater for that. In terms of the Class 1, it's obviously the Class 1 intake. We've had worked out based on the figures that were supplied to us by the Ministry of Education. I can't remember the figures offhand, but if you, for example, did classes 1, 2, and 3, we had done the calculations, would have worked out to be about $8 or $9 million, or about $8 million. So about class 1 would be about approximately $2 million, about a third of it. The whole idea is, like I said, to get the children drinking milk, get into that culture of drinking milk when they go to school, as opposed to drinking Coke. So the supply will be guaranteed, and also I understand, somebody suggested one, hot meal a day. The logistics of that is very difficult. There are some schools in an isolated island, and to ensure that you get the same quality of meal, say, supplied in Namaka, in Nandi, and the person in Yasawa is quite difficult to manage. So by providing this milk, we actually, in a way, also easing the burden for the parents. They don't have to feel the need to, give them money to buy a drink. They can say, well, no, you're going to get your milk. So hopefully they'll use that money to get them a proper meal. That's how we've worked it out. Logistically, it works out well. In the same way with free education. By giving free education, we are then able to put more money in the pockets of the parents, so they can then, for example, buy the sandals, buy the exercise books, or buy the school bag, or buy the uniform if they need to. So it's a question of, as a government, you need to look at not just saying what we're going to give, but how will you give it? Is it easy to manage? Is it easy to stop the fraud? When we had the school bus fare vouchers, when we initially had the vouchers, we discovered that some school teachers were getting together with seniors, high school students, and photocopying and selling at half price. So we obviously have to take that into account too.
All right. On that note, it's time for a break. When we come back, more discussions on the Fiji First Manifesto. Welcome back to For the Record. Tonight we're speaking with the General Secretary of Fiji First, Mr. Syed Qayyum, and we're discussing the manifesto of the party that was launched 2 days ago in Nandi. Mr. Syed Qayyum, before the break we spoke about one of the initiatives with regards to supplying milk in schools. Something else that Fiji First proposes to do is provide medicine worth $8 million. When you say non-communicable diseases, medicine prescribed by a doctor, what are you talking about? It could be a wide spectrum of things, non-essential medicines?
No, well, generally non-essential medicines don't get prescribed. So a doctor is not going to prescribe and say, you need to take some super-duper fancy vitamin B drug, that you find. They'll normally prescribe drugs, whether it's antibiotics, whether it may be, it now includes non-communicable diseases too, which is, diabetes and high blood pressure. So it includes that spectrum of medicine also, and there's a limit. You have to be an individual earning $20,000 or less. Otherwise, you're not eligible for it. Because you earn more, you should be able to pay for that. But you must also remember, most of these items are already price controlled. So we are saying yes, it's price controlled, plus we'll also ensure that those people earning below $20,000, we will pick up the tab for you in that respect. And we've calculated, given the amount of people who are earning below $20,000, that's how we've come up with the figure. Now this is the other thing, Edwin and Chris, that you see is a difference between our manifesto and the other manifestos, is that we've actually put a price tag wherever we've been able to assess that. In fact, most of the areas you'll see we put the price tag on it, so people know it's not irresponsible governance. We are not saying we'll offer you the sun and the moon, but don't worry about the cost. We are also very concerned about the cost. For example, with electricity, we could have made it all nice and fancy and say we'll give it to you up to subsidize up to 100 kilowatts. But no, because we need to stay within our means.
We'll stick to the policies in the manifesto, but you've brought up an interesting point. One of the reasons that most of the political parties have told us that they can't budget their strategies or their initiatives is because they haven't seen the Auditor General's report. It hasn't come out, they don't know how much money there is in the government. What do you have to say to that?
You see, anybody would know, and I'm sure you know this too, the Auditor General's report does not tell you how much money there is in government. It's the annual budget announcement that tells you how much money is in government. That has been revealed. You go to the Ministry of Finance website, you'll see how much money there is. That's where the budget deficit is announced. So it tells you how much money we are collecting, how much we are spending. The RBF can verify that, the IMF can verify that. The Auditor General's report does not tell you how much money there is in government. What the Auditor General's report does is tells you that, for example, the Prime Minister, who is also the Minister for Finance, when he announces the budget and says, we have allocated $50 million for Ministry of Health, for example. And in that $50 million, we're going to upgrade this health center, spend $2 million here, buy an MRI machine for $2 million. What the Auditor General does, and his team does, they actually go and find out whether the actually health center was built or not. Was there a proper tender process called or not? Is the MRI machine physically there or not? Is it working or not? Was the procurement policies followed or not? That's what the Auditor General does. And then he may say, okay, whoa, we've discovered that, for example, they've said they spent $2 million on the MRI machine, but we've discovered looking at the documentation, in fact, $1.5 million was spent. We don't know where the other $500,000 has gone. So let's talk to the accounts clerk, let's talk to the permanent secretary, and then the permanent secretaries are always the chief accountant. So they need to be held responsible for the finance itself. But that's what the Auditor General's report does. This is a smokescreen by the other political parties saying, because the Auditor General's report has not come out, therefore we don't know how much money is in government. Of course they know that. Of course, if they did their homework, they'll look at the budget. They go to the Reserve Bank of Fiji, they'll go to FIRCA, and it's announced every year, and none of those figures announced by the Prime Minister have ever been disputed by international organizations like IMF. I mean, IMF now comes in every year, and Article 4 looks at how the finances are going. They give their report, and none of them ever challenge that we are in fact hiding anything in terms of government revenue, government expenditure.
Chris, I'll give you the next question.
Mr. Syed Qayyum, speaking of the Auditor General's report, the Bainimarama government's always said it's transparent and accountable. But political parties are saying, when you say you are transparent and accountable, why then haven't you been able to give the Auditor General's report in the last 7 years?
Okay, although we're straying away from the manifesto, but anyway, I'll address this. Right on this show, I believe, when you had the president of NFP appear on the show, and then when you had put a question to the president of NFP saying your assessment of the economy and the growth is very much in variance with the RBF, when you pointed those figures out, she said, oh, they're politicized. So she basically, cast aside those figures, or even though they're provided by an independent body, the RBF is as apolitical as you can get. So in this political climate, can you imagine what will happen if you release the Auditor General's report? It will be highly politicized. People will distort it. There are certain sections of the media that will distort it. The reality is this. The Auditor General's report is going to come out in about 4 weeks' time. Because under the Constitution, as soon as the election results are announced, a government is appointed, you have to have Parliament called within 2 weeks. So by early October, Parliament will meet. You know the Auditor General's report will all come out then. The Public Accounts Committee, which is always chaired by the opposition, they can go back as far as they like. And they can go back and see what was done. They can go back to 2006, 2005, 2008, 10, 12, 13, whatever it is. They have full scrutiny of it. But the other point that now that we're talking about Public Accounts Committee is, please let me point this out to you. Previously, As you know, the Auditor General's report used to come out, Public Accounts Committee used to, comment on various issues, but nothing ever got done. Classic example, Mahendra Chaudhary fixed up his house when he was Prime Minister, saying, because this is my personal house, it's going to be my official house also, I need to carry out renovations to make it look like a Prime Minister's house. Government money was spent to fix up somebody's personal property. In the Auditor General's report, front page Fiji Times, I remember I've got cuttings of it still today, where they said this is wrong. It was in the papers for 2 days. Maybe FBC was not on television then, but maybe the radio station talked about it, but nothing got done. Guess what? What will happen now? If those types of things happen now under the Constitution, you have FICAC, you have the Accountability and Transparency Commission. People can be actually taken to task. People can be charged, and these investigations can be carried out independently. So that's the new way of looking at accountability and transparency. That's true accountability and transparency.
We've gotten into the issue of the Auditor General's report. Let's have it out. It's said that the Bainimarama government has too much to hide and they're afraid. It's talked about everywhere you go. It's used against Fiji First, in fact. Is there something to hide for the last 8 years, as it's said?
Edwin, you'll get to find out in 4 weeks' time. In the same way, everybody was talking about that the Prime Minister was getting paid $1.5 million salary. I was getting paid $1.3 million salary.
Any truth to those two claims?
You've seen the financial declarations. You can go to the Ministry of Finance and check that. Obviously not. But you see, the point is this. Let's not go on rumor mongering. Let's go on proper documentation. And again, the reason why this idea is being floated around is because most of these parties that have launched the manifesto, getting back to the manifesto, launched the manifesto, they're actually just promising things for the sake of it. They have not put any figures around it. I was on one of your radio shows the other day where Athar Singh said, when we talked about the economy, and I said the growth rate is about 3.6, 3.8, is going to be revised, and indeed it has been revised to about 4.6%. And he said, well, they're projecting a few years' time where the growth rate will drop, therefore people will lose their jobs. Obviously he does not understand basic economics. If the growth rate is 3.6, following year is 4.6, following year maybe 5, and then if it drops to 3.3, it does not mean the economy has gone into a recession. Obviously not. Only through recession you lose jobs. If the growth rate is slower, it is still growing, but it is still growing. You see, they don't understand very fundamental aspects of economic governance of a country. But also there's a huge difference between being an economist, for example, and being savvy with finance and commerce. They are two very different aspects. Most of these people have not been in the private sector. They do not know how the private sector thinks, operates, and what are the consequences, for example, of providing certain policies. Now, the corporate tax rate has been reduced to 20%. Revenue collection by FIRCA has increased. Many people say, well, how can that be? Of course it can be. If you look at basic fundamental aspects on tax cuts, people say, well, hang on, the tax cut is lower, might as well not hide things. Let's not keep the two cash registers, one for FIRCA and one for me privately. They end up paying the taxes in any case. There's a lot higher levels of compliance. Obviously, there still be tax dodges, but your level of collection increases in the same way that now, when the Prime Minister was appointed Prime Minister, the tax rates that anybody earning more than $8,400 had to pay taxes at 15%. Today, anybody earning less than $16,000 does not pay tax. If they do pay tax, the first bracket is 7%. Now that obviously is led consumption-led growth, but as we have seen now through the figures that have also been released, a lot of the investment, a lot of the growth is now investment-based. In fact, there's only been 3 times in Fiji's history where the private sector has driven growth in such high levels. Back in the 1980s, back in 1998, and then now. And in fact, this is the longest period of sustained growth. So the economy is looking well. And this manifesto, getting back to the manifesto, is in fact designed in such a manner that we are trying to create and inculcate that continued levels of confidence in the economy, and people know exactly what will happen in the future. If you look at the other political parties, they don't really have an economic plan per se. They don't have it. We've got an economic plan, we've got a proven track record, and what is actually going to happen now is that whilst the economy is growing, we're also looking after those people at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. For example, water. Very
On
basic
that,
things.
I'm going to have to pause you for a moment. We have to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk more about the Fiji First manifesto. Pulvanaka, welcome back to For the Record. We're speaking with the General Secretary of Fiji First, Mr. Aya Syed Kayum, about the manifesto that was launched 2 days ago. Before the break, Mr. Syed Kayum, you brought up water. Just reading from the manifesto, Fiji First proposes to provide 91,250 liters of water free of charge per year. This applies to families that earn less than $30,000. Is this going to be sourced from the Water Authority of Fiji, and how many families do you propose to cover with this initiative?
Well, you would see that in that we've said families below $30,000. So it's a total household income of $30,000, as opposed to medicine. Medicine obviously is an individual thing. So an individual who earns less than $20,000. But this is a household. So, you can have, for example, 5 people living in a home and all earning, $20,000 each. So that's $100,000, household income. That won't apply to them. It applies to families who earn less than $30,000. So obviously those kind of statistics will need to be ascertained. We've got some rough estimates as to how many people will cover. But that 91,250 liters is based on the WHO statistics, which basically says that a human being requires approximately 50 liters of water a day, to go to the bathroom, toilet, washing, cleaning and all of that. And so based on that, 5 people in a family, 250 liters of water a day, extrapolate that to 365, it comes to 91,250 liters. It is a basic requirement. Water is a basic requirement. We've of course brought about a number of changes to Water Authority of Fiji. We obviously need to bring about more changes. There's a huge emphasis, of course, now in extending the water reticulation system out to some of the outer areas in Fiji. Of course, the pipes cannot be laid everywhere, but we need to extend as far as possible. Some of them will have their own reticulation system independently of the main grid, so to speak.
In this initiative, we're not talking about people who are already connected, are we?
No, we're talking about people who are already connected. We're talking about people who are already connected, people who are actually paying a water bill. So you are exempt if you're earning less than $30,000 a total household. If you're earning less than that, $30,000, then you'll be exempt from paying for 91,250 liters of water a year.
Chris, I'll give you the next question.
Mr. Syed Kayum, I think that's one of the policies that I picked up was interesting. The water that you're going to provide free, 91,250 liters in fact, and the fact that you are increasing electricity subsidy from 75 kilowatts to 85 kilowatts. Now you said you won't promise the sun and the moon. Was there any chance of giving free water and free electricity?
Well, it's not free electricity. In fact, at the moment, for example, the electricity rate is 34 cents. So we subsidize it. So at the moment, the users up to 75 kilowatts, we pay 17 cents and the consumer pays 17 cents. Because we recognize people with lower socioeconomic backgrounds, we need to give them some assistance because we need them to have energy also. For example, a lot of children, if you don't have electricity, they can't read. They have to read under a candlelight or out in the street lights. So that's the whole rationale behind it. You see many poor people saying, my children, they read under candlelight. We don't want that. We want children to be educated and have a particular level playing field. So the usage of up to 75 kilowatts is subsidized. We're saying we're adding only another 10, but it is for some people a 10 that is quite a lot. And we can afford it. I mean, we didn't say 100. We said 10 more. And then we subsidize that also. And let me also tell you, the electricity rate in Fiji is the lowest in the South Pacific, even compared to Australia and New Zealand. You go to countries like Vanuatu, the rates are something like $1.50 a unit. In Fiji, it's 34 cents. And we've also made a segregated demarcation. Before we changed the laws recently, everybody, whether you're a business, whether you're running a factory, you pay the same rate as a normal consumer. Now, the more you use, for example, businesses, they actually pay up to 44 cents. It's still the cheapest. So that's how we made the differentiation. It's not promising the sun and the moon, but it is a great assistance to those families, who had the lower end of socioeconomic scale, and it actually has been welcomed quite significantly. Same thing with water. It's a basic need. As you know, under the Constitution also, it says that everybody must have access to water. We don't want, for example, families just because the father or mother loses their job, they can't pay the water bill, they no longer get water. We want people to get the basic level of water to be able to wash, clean themselves, because there's a particular level of human dignity attached to that.
If I may, so far we've talked about medicine, we've talked about milk for children, water for families earning less than 30,000, and subsidies on electricity. It seems it's obvious that the manifesto is based heavily on low-income earners or the poor. Is this a deliberate move?
Well, the Bainimarama government's policies has always been a deliberate move to help the people at the low end of socio-economic scale, like the tax breaks that I talked about. You know, a person earning before $14,000 had to pay 15% tax. Now they no longer pay tax. They take the full $14,000 home. In the same way we've subsidized bus fares. That bus fare subsidy is not given to the rich kids or the rich families, it's given to the poor end families. So this is a continuation of our policies, not something new we've plucked out of the air. It's the same philosophy that we are continuing. We're giving some additional benefits which we can now afford. In the same way people asked, why wasn't free education done in 2007? Because when we came in, we obviously found the state of affairs as far as the finances are concerned weren't obviously that good. The economy was not that strong. We had to grow the economy. We can now afford it. We believe there's a sustainable level of growth, sustainable level of finances. For example, our foreign reserves are now about $1.6 billion. There was only $300 million when we were appointed. So $1.6 billion, which is great. So it provides a greater conducive environment for example, investment. Investment rates now, lending rates has gone down a lot more. People used to pay about 8, 9, 10% to borrow money to build a house. Now they can pay about 4, 5%. So the economy is doing well. It's not just simply chugging along. It's actually growing at a good pace. So we're able to provide that kind of levels of assistance. In the same way with squatter development, in the same way with housing. You would see pictures there in the manifesto about how PM opened those flats in what is commonly known as Jittu Estate. So that process is already continuing, those funding is already being made available. But in this manifesto we have said there are people who've been living, for example, on state land for 50, 60, 70 years as squatters.
I'd like to come to the issue of land later, but first, the proposal to take over the import of fuel.
Yes.
It says in the manifesto that Fiji First, if elected into government, will become responsible for the purchase of fuel, and then you will subsequently sell it off to private companies. Some would say that you're interfering in what should actually be private sector driven.
No, not at all actually. All we are doing is that government is not going to get into any infrastructure. And we've used the example of Mauritius. Let me tell you very quickly how the model works. Essentially at the moment you have fuel companies, individually, you have Total, you have Mobil, and you have Pacific Energy. They go off and buy the fuel on their own. Most of them, I think all three of them buy it from Singapore. Now, in Mauritius what they have done, in fact I think Total is also there in Mauritius, and perhaps even Mobil. What they do is government has decided to be the bulk purchaser. So we are a very small country compared to other countries as far as energy demands are concerned. But if you put all the energy demands, all the fuel requirements by the oil companies together, and you have one purchaser, you're able to get better pricing. You know, in the same way you go to a shop, you buy one t-shirt, as opposed to if you go and buy 10 t-shirts, the shopkeeper will give you a discount if you're buying 10 pieces. So it may be going to the same family. But what we're doing now with the fuel, we're going to have international tenders. That's what Mauritius has done. In fact, we had this discussion with the minister responsible for energy from Mauritius a number of months back. We've already talked to them about the various models, etc. So in this way, government is able to call for international tenders, get the best pricing for refined fuel. We're not going to do any refinement in Fiji because we can't. You need huge volumes to refine. We get the refined fuel. In 1 year you may buy it from Singapore or Middle East, India or America, or whatever it is that does refining. You get the best price, and then, for example, the government of Fiji may say, we require, say, 100 million liters of 100 liters of kerosene. So of that, Total may require 40 and somebody else has 60 or 30 each, whatever the balance is. When the ships come, these oil companies already have their depot facilities in Vunda. They just simply offload the fuel in their various depot. But the purchaser of it is the government, as far as the main purchasing is concerned, and government simply sells it to these companies. And these companies will still carry on with the retail, they'll still do the distribution, government does not get into it. In Mauritius, in fact, the government has gone one step ahead. Any resale of the fuel to the islands around Mauritius, the government does that. Now, what has happened as a result of that in Mauritius, because they've set aside what they call a price stabilization fund. Because oil fuel changes, the pricing of fuel changes all the time, and in Fiji now kind of tried to stabilize it by having a review every quarter. But, so if you set aside a stabilization fund, in Mauritius, they have not had a price increase for 2 years, because the government is able to manage that with the stabilization fund, because it's been able to buy those that fuel in bulk. That's the rationale behind it. Because we're very much a price taker, we need to be concerned, everybody's concerned about energy costs. In the same way, for example, when the Monosavu Dam gets empty, the low levels of water, then we have to use more diesel generation energy. So if the price of diesel goes up, the price of your electricity will also go up. So this idea is to actually control that pricing, to be able to give cheaper energy. So when you use your car, when the bus operators use their buses, we keep the cost down.
Do you have an estimate, if this system were to come into place, how much would an average motorist, how much could they be saving?
I can't tell you that offhand. I can't say, well, 5 cents a litre, whatever it is. A lot of it depends on the world pricing at that time. But most definitely this type of model has worked in a country like Mauritius. It's very similar to us. The population level is slightly over 1 million. So, obviously we're already talking to them, and we want to pick their brains on it, and we've had some discussion with the person who actually runs it. So it is going to be a very good model, and it will work well for Fiji.
All right. On that note, time for another break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to For the Record. We are in Nandi tonight speaking with the General Secretary of Fiji First, Mr. Ayaz Syed Kayum. Now, Chris, you had a question for Mr. Syed Kayum. I'll give you the floor.
Mr. Syed Kayum, your policy in the manifesto where you say that the minimum wage to be increased to $2.32 an hour from July 2015. Now, critics may say, why didn't the government implement this year?
Yeah, no, if you read the Reddy report, there were the two options that were available, and most of the business houses had actually agreed to it, but some of them wanted to be eased into it, so it gives them time to plan, because to make a jump from something below $2 immediately up to $2.32 would not have helped them plan, have their cash flow done. So it's simply just implementing what the recommendation had made, or the recommendation of the Reddy report. But also, more so, it gave the businesses time to adjust. They knew it was coming, and if you see the wage rate comes into effect in the middle of the year, so it's still give them a breathing space so they can plan, do their budgeting. And I think this is one of the successes of the Beni Marama government. We've been managed to sort of juggle the various requirements of whether it's employee groups or employer groups, and being able to manage them and bring them along with us. For example, many years ago, well, not many years ago, some years back, the banks went on a strike when there's fundamental changes made in the lending system. We don't want that, of course. In the same way, for example, you will note that we've recommended that employer groups now contribute 10% to your FNPF. You still continue to contribute your 8%, they'll contribute 10%. And many business houses and people recognize, well, it's not that much of a jump, and enough notice will be given, but it actually helps the economy also. And I can talk to you about how it feeds into FNPF. FNPF now is doing quite well. They've done all this write-backs. The members' funds are secure. FNPF has now received international recognition and, in fact, an award, which it never has before. So the funds are being managed well. This will help you, all the employees, as an individual employee, to have more money saved quicker in your FNPF. We have more country savings now.
You don't expect businesses to oppose this proposal for 10% from the employer and 8% from the employee? It's always been equal share.
Yes, no, I don't think so, because you see the businesses also now paying lower taxes, and they're getting certain benefits. In fact, you see there's various benefits we've seen even to small to medium enterprises. We've said that there's certain fee review structure will be carried out. So the actual cost base becomes less. The reality is, for example, even things like telecommunications help. The cost of a mobile phone, making calls from your landline, has become a lot cheaper now. So businesses are actually saving money. So in that way, if they're able to save money, we're saying, hang on, you can contribute a little bit to your employees. You can have the minimum wage rise to $2.32. This is for obviously unskilled workers. The other workers have the 8 Wages Council. But also at the same time, you can contribute towards FNPF.
With regards to FNPF, the opposition of Fiji First, those who are standing against you in the elections, are saying that the FNPF was used as a personal piggy bank for the Bainimarama government. You would have heard this.
Well, I didn't hear the personal piggy bank, but it's very interesting because I don't know how did they say it's personal piggy bank. I can tell you how it worked before and how they worked in Natandola, where they're going to use about $800–900 million just to put up a hotel that was in fact not very engineering-wise very secure, and that was going to be a third of the members' funds. The members' funds at that time was $3 billion.
Has the government relied heavily on the FNPF to secure loans?
Absolutely not. Nothing more than any other government. The Ratumara government borrowed from FNPF, the SVT government borrowed from FNPF, the 5-year decree-led governance of Rambuka government borrowed from FNPF, the Chaudhry government would have borrowed, the Garasi government was definitely borrowed. We have not borrowed any more than any other government. But I can tell you one thing, this government through its legal reforms had made the FNPF strong, because there were reports written as far back as the early 1990s that said the way that FNPF was being managed, the way that certain individuals were getting 25% rate of return, 18%, 17% rate of return, all the FNPF money would have finished by 2052. And guess what? Individuals like young men like yourselves, by the time you would have retired, you would have contributed from now till then, you would not have got a single cent. Because there were individuals who were getting huge amounts of money as rate of return up to 25%. People who had worked in FNPF, management of FNPF were getting higher levels of rate of return. Whereas the low income people were getting very low rates of return. So now in Fiji, we have a situation where a superannuation fund has carried out those reforms. So you can be rest assured that you will, when you retire, we have a population base that is very, very young. People who are 22 years old are contributing to FNPF in the workforce. They will have their money there. Under the previous system, under the previous legal framework, their money would have finished.
Let's move.
So what we're saying now with those reforms, we have the money that's secure. There's no piggy bank per se. Personal piggy bank, you mean individually the PM has been borrowing money and I've been borrowing money? No. But I can tell you what, personally the individual members of the executive management of FNPF are doing that. They were treating FNPF like the piggy bank. One of them is still absconded from law and is out, the bench warrant is out overseas. She's still out there because they're using FNPF for their own personal income loans with no interest. That's what was happening in FNPF. That does not happen in FNPF anymore.
All right, let's move to land, TLTB land in particular. It's become a very sensitive topic for voters. But I see in your manifesto the proposal to have $10 million set aside to help Itoke develop their land for subdivision and development. How is that going to work? What's the intent here?
Well, as I said to Chris earlier on, what the intent is this: we want the Itoke people to develop the land themselves. Like if you see most of the land development that has taken place in Fiji with Itoke land, it's generally been, you may come along as an investor, go to TLTB and say, I want to lease 100 acres of land because I want to do some type of subdivision. So the landowners will then lease the land through TLTB. In fact, TLTB does not, in most of the cases, that's the other part of what we've said will be reforms in TLTB. We get a lot of complaints from landowners where TLTB in many instances have not even got their consent to renew leases or lease land. And in fact, in the other way, sometimes when the landowners want to lease, TLTB does not lease it. So the point here is this: we want the landowners themselves to develop the land. If they develop the land themselves, they can sell the blocks of land themselves, not a rich investor coming along, leasing it, subdividing it, and then making the cream. The idea is here to help them to develop it. So sometimes, as I mentioned, they may not necessarily have all the cash. You know, normally if you go to a bank and you say, I want to carry out subdivision, they'll say, well, how much are you going to contribute? How much money will you make? How much will you contribute? They may require some equity. And the equity may be used, in fact, to, for example, say, well, we need to have electricity in this land. The transformers can sometimes cost up to $2–3 million, or cost $800–900,000. Connection to utilities like water, sewage, even roading in that subdivision. You have to pay for it yourself as a developer. This is where we're saying we're going to come along and encourage them to do the development themselves. So if they're a good plan, we'll pay for it.
Is
this also inculcates a sense of, well, hang on, let's do development, let's contribute to economic development of Fiji.
Does this also apply to agricultural leases? Because I would suspect that if a landowner hears that they have the opportunity to develop agricultural land themselves and they're getting money to do it, tenants might lose out on their leases.
No, absolutely nothing to do with that. This is to do with subdivision. Now, if you see, there's also provision made for a preparation for land for agricultural purposes. We've set aside some money because there are many landowners, for example, who want to get into agriculture. There are many tenants who actually have leased land, but they don't have the funds to, for example, to grade the place, pull down, whatever needs to be taken out, the shrub, etc. They don't have the initial money to do that investment. So this way, landowners can do their own agricultural farming. We clear the land for them. They want to plant, say, 100 acres of dalo. They may need to do some irrigation, some land clearance. We also have that thing, the provision also available for tenants too. So that's a separate issue. Doesn't mean that the landowners will, somehow or the other affect farmers themselves. It's more to do with subdivision.
Chris?
Land is a very sensitive issue. Political parties have been using it in their campaigns. Do you think you've done enough in the manifesto to attract votes from landowners?
You see, I think you are making it a sensitive issue, or not you per se, but the political parties are making it a sensitive issue. The Constitution is quite categorically states that when you talk about sensitivity, it's about ownership. Categorically states that land, as far as customary owners, the Itauke people, the Rotuman people is concerned, it's safe. It's there. It's in the Bill of Rights for the first time. It says you cannot permanently alienate Itauke land. Now let me very quickly highlight this to you, and thank you for the opportunity. Because you see, under the previous government, under the 1990 Constitution, the SBT government approved to alienate permanently Itauke land in Denarau and got converted to freehold land. It's gone. Finished. The SDL government, again, who seemed to be, the gatekeepers of guarding customary land, they were the ones who had a hand in actually alienating land in Momi. Itauke land converted to freehold land. So, you see, under the so-called entrenched provision, notwithstanding that, they're still able to do that. Under this constitution that has been put in place by the Bainimarama government, following widespread public consultations, we now have a provision in the constitution that says you cannot do that, period. And, for example, if government does require some land for public purpose, building a road, a reservoir, they have to pay the landowners fair compensation, market rates. And more so, another step, if, for example, they need a hill to put up a reservoir, and after 10 years they no longer require that, and even though the government has paid compensation, they must give that land back to the landowners if they no longer require it, or if they want to use the hill to, say, set up something else. Because the initial purpose for which you lease the land is for a reservoir. So you have to give it back. Many tracts of land, for example, that the Itauke people had given originally in the past for a particular purpose, that land, as soon as it went into the Crown land, it's gone. So now they're using it for some other purpose, it's still with the Crown. So this constitution now obviously cannot go back in time, but it ensures that for the future now, that cannot ever happen again. So the sensitivity is not there, it's being created. It's being created. The law is quite clear, it protects that. The law for the first time now under the Bill of Rights says that any landowner that there's any mineral found underneath your land below 6 feet, you must get a fair share of the royalties. So DELPA is not going around telling people that. They're telling them basically lies. And the people of Fiji must know that these people are lying to them. And so the law is quite clear. What we are saying, the law is clear, it protects the land. Let's focus on economic development. How do we empower people? How do you bring water, roads, electricity? How do you develop your own land and get that money that you require for your own well-being?
Mr. Syed Qayyum, I'm going to have to pause you once again. It's time for another break. Welcome back to For the Record. We're speaking with the General Secretary of Fiji First, Mr. A. Syed Qayyum, and on our panel also is our senior multimedia journalist from FPC News, Christopher Chand. Mr. Syed Qayyum, before the break you were talking about how you need to talk about the issues, development issues, people's issues, and what makes a real difference to the voters. But your opposition, the Fiji First opposition, is trying to divide the voters. They're using tactics which target Fiji First directly. Do you feel that we're still in an environment, in a climate, where political parties are using division to campaign and to win over voters?
Yeah, in fact, unfortunately, Edwin, the unfortunate thing is they're using things like religion, using things like race, ethnicity, to actually divide people. And you know, it's all very emotional driven, it's all very negative style of campaigning. Most of our, you know, the feedback that we get, that's what people tell us. In fact, I was in Nandi, and I had a guy who came and told me, he said, you know, NFP has come to my Gao, or my village, and has said that, he said, you know, I'm a Hindu and I'm a Fiji First supporter. He said, but the NFP people have come there and are doing this Hindu-Muslim differences. They're talking, you know, about this. They said, please come to my area just in case people get carried away with it.
I'm sorry, NFP is not here. We can't corroborate what was said.
I'm telling you what I'm getting is feedback.
Fair enough. Let's not name parties. I've let it slide.
There are some parties who are doing that. There are also some parties, for example, who are talking about Indian Fijian, you know, as the old way of speaking. They're talking about that the Indo-Fijians will take over your land. There's a conspiracy. The Chinese have bought Fiji. It'll get sold. Nothing is based on facts. There's a government debt of $500 billion. I don't think they understand. $500 billion is half the USA debt. USA debt is about $1 trillion. You see, there's a lot of that, and unfortunately, and they're also doing issues like North Indian, South Indian, you know, what they say, Kurwi, Madraji, and all of this type of stuff. It is very unfortunate, because we would love to campaign on issues. We would love to campaign on various issues like that. Well, you know, our campaign tactics is basically go out and give people the information, the correct information. For example, people are distorting what is in the Constitution. There are a lot of lies that are being spread. So essentially we are going around and telling people this is not the truth and this is what our policies are. We're not there to personalize issues. I understand in one of the political parties, not naming them, I'm sure you've read the manifesto, the Prime Minister and I are mentioned in the manifesto. What type of manifesto is that? We're personalizing issues. So you see, I think that is the most unfortunate thing. And what we are saying to members of the public when you go to campaign, saying to them is, look, you must think about the future. When you think about the future, don't just think about the future about yourself also, but think about the country. Because if the country's position, if the country's future is secure, it means security for your own country. It means security for you as an individual. It means security for your children and your children's children. That's what we need to be focused on. Otherwise, we will never progress as a country. We'll take 2 steps forward, 3 steps backwards. We'll be doing the same old thing, plodding along. What the Bainimarama Marama government is offering through Fiji First is also a game plan. A game plan that's got a proven track record. The economy is growing. It's an inclusive, modern, progressive way of thinking and looking at Fiji. And that's the only way that you can have a successful country, which will be for the success of everybody. By, for example, treating everybody equally, it does not in any way mean that we are somehow or the other negating the rights of the indigenous people of Fiji. We recognize the unique culture, customs, tradition, language. We recognize the unique customary ownership of land. All of that is protected, even given unprecedented security. That is all in its place. Let's now come together as a nation, focus on growing the economy, focus on addressing the many socio-economic problems we've had in the past, and we'll become strong.
You brought up the issue of identity. I'm sorry. One quick question. I'm sorry. Chris is biting to have a question as well. The common identity has been used by a lot of people. I'm not just talking about political parties. There's a lot of disacceptance, if that's a word, unacceptance of that as a national identity. Do you feel that Fiji First, if elected into government, may need to review that decision or hold some sort of consultations?
You see, again, Edwin, this is being made into a big deal. The reality is, you know, some people are saying we need to have a referendum about this, etc. The reality is they do not have a referendum in Australia, New Zealand, various other countries. The reality also is this, and please, I urge you to read it. Even Yash Guy's report, read the preamble. It says, we the people of Fiji declare we are Fijian. Itauke and other races that made Fiji home. You know, you have some political parties that appear on a show with saying, oh, this constitution has been shoved on us. We believe in the Yash Guy report. Even the Yash Guy report has said that. They claimed also that the previous constitution said everybody is a Fiji island. They did not say that. So you see, it's being made into a big issue because the whole idea of making a big issue is to make it an emotive issue. So when people go to the polls, they don't talk about or they don't look at things about what we put in our manifesto, which is about water, roads, electricity, jobs, employment. They're thinking about, oh, you're going to lose your culture, your identity, your religion is under threat, somebody else is taking over. None of that is happening. So we need to focus on the main game, the ball game. The ball game is ensuring that we grow the economy of Fiji, everybody benefits from it, we lead prosperous life, and we become a very strong and united country.
Chris?
Mr. Syed Qayyum, I'm sorry, I'm going to take you away from the manifesto and the policies that you've been discussing, but to your role as the Minister for Elections, there's been a lot of confusion from people in remote and rural areas who are saying that they thought that elections would be a one-day affair held on September 17th, and then they told that pre-polling starts from September 3rd for a few weeks. So government was always saying that elections would be a one-day affair?
Yes, we did say that. We also said there would be pre-polling. If you go back to our speeches, we would have said elections will be conducted one day, but it will also be pre-polling. Same thing, Australia says they have elections in one day, but they also have pre-polling. You're living up somewhere near Uluru or somewhere in some remote part in some cattle station in Australia, they vote beforehand. So that is the thing. In terms of the messaging of it, whether they got the information out, that's not my responsibility or the Ministry of Justice that has elections within it. That's the responsibility of the Electoral Commission and the Supervisor of Elections. That's their operation. They handle the operations, the logistics and all of that. I think some media organizations are perhaps exaggerating it. Some are giving a objective analysis of it. So, at the end of the day, the issue is this, that we've started a new way of conducting elections, and the feedback that we get, many people agree with the fact, for example, that the votes will be cast wherever they are, the votes will be counted wherever they are cast. It's a good thing. People want to see that, as opposed to the ballot boxes travel all the way, from Singatoka Valley all the way to Natambua, or all the way somewhere from Netasiri all the way to Silver Grammar School. We don't know what happens along the way, those types of issues. But it's good to have that form of democratization. I think overall it's very, very positive. In terms of what we need to be considering is that, okay, if they've identified some glitches, is the elections office identifying and working together to make sure, for example, I understand there were 4 voters that missed out in one of the polling stations in the Yasawas. Have they made arrangements to make sure that those 4 voters actually get to vote or not? At the end of the day, that's what we should be looking at, whether the whole process works or not.
Mr. Syed Qayyum, sorry, I'm going to take you back to the manifesto. The manifesto has nothing on foreign policy. Is that something that you overlooked, or is that something that you will carry on with the current government's foreign policy of look north policy?
Most definitely. I mean, like I said, we could have written a 100-page document in terms of what we have done and what we're going to do, but we don't want to do that because, as our Prime Minister, our leader, has said, that a lot of the things that we've already done will continue. And this is why this manifesto sets aside some of the basic principles, sets apart some of the basic principles of the new initiatives that we put in place. But otherwise, everything is the same. Obviously, as a country, you need to be able to, as they say in economics terms or commercial terms, share your risk. You simply should not just be partners with just 1 or 2 countries. Under the Bainimarama government, we've signed more diplomatic relationships, bilateral relationships, than any other time prior to government, prior to independence or post-independence. So post-independence, we did not have that many diplomatic relationships. In a very short period of time, through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we've signed, I think, about 38 or 35 countries we've signed diplomatic relationships. So we're expanding ourselves. And that obviously needs to be done. It does not mean it has to be done at the expense of any other country. It does not mean it has to be done at the expense of Australia, New Zealand, Japan, or whoever it is. But we can be one good global citizen.
All right.
Why?
I'm going to need to take another break. I'll give you the question afterwards. We'll be right back. Welcome back to For the Record. We're speaking with the General Secretary of Fiji First, Mr. Aya Syed Qayyum, about the party manifesto that was launched in Nandi 2 days ago. Chris, you had a question for Mr. Syed Qayyum.
Yeah, the reason I asked on the foreign policy was the fact that Fiji's relationship has strained with the Solomon Islands on one hand, the government's been saying that you're promoting MSG brotherhood, and given that the aviation standoff with the Solomon Islands has reached such a stage that there's no flights between Nadi and Honiara. So both countries, the passengers are suffering at the end.
Well, I don't think that just because you have a civil aviation issue that you can say that therefore MSG is strained. That may be your reading into it, but they're two separate issues. Fiji is very much part and parcel of MSG. It's one of the leading countries in the MSG. The issue is per se to do with civil aviation issues. So the Civil Aviation Department has decided to take a particular position. All we're saying is we've always said we want to talk to them, we want to not negotiate through the media. There are certain clauses under the ASA, Air Services Agreement, that needs to be adhered to. And we will need to talk to them about that. Passengers are coming along via other countries also. I know Air New Guinea has, obviously, as you know, Air New Guinea picks up passengers from Solomon Islands. They have the right to do that, so many Solomon Islanders or people traveling to or from Solomon Islands are also using Air New Guinea. That excess is still continuing, albeit through another airline. We obviously want to resolve that, but many of these air services agreements need to be looked at, need to be revamped. Some of them are very, very old, and we're in the process of doing that.
So you're saying after elections, the Prime Minister will try and hold talks with the Solomon Islands Prime Minister?
It's an issue to do with civil aviation, and the Civil Aviation Department needs to talk to each other, the various ministries, respective ministries, and we have extended that hand, and we are hopefully that that'll happen. It's not a unusual situation. If you look at throughout the world, if people read on civil aviation, you'll find that many countries at the bilateral level always had those issues, and they obviously, at the end of the day, the commercial realities kick in. The commercial realities always make people the right decision in that sense, and I'm sure Solomon Islands airline will recognize that too.
Going back to the manifesto, there is a section on information technology, communications, and digital television. This would be groundbreaking for Fiji. Fiji First is proposing to set aside $2 million to buy equipment for viewers. Are we talking about people sitting at home and the government buying equipment for them? Is that what you propose?
Well, no, this is for set-top boxes, because the digital television work has already commenced actually. Cabinet had approved this last year, and the tests will in fact be held from next month. So the tests will be done. There'll be a handful of people that will be tried in access to digital television. The frequencies obviously need to be all aligned. The spectrum planning, and this is in fact when we did the spectrum planning about 3 years ago, this was the whole objective. In fact, if you look at our press statement then, we said the spectrum planning was done with the view to ensure we get digital television very soon, and we need to get. The people of Fiji, all Fijian people, deserve digital television. Fiji now, of course, is the ICT hub of the Pacific, and we see many other positive relation to that. So what we're looking at setting aside $2 million to assist in the procurement of set-top boxes to ensure it is easily procured or easily accessible, in particular by people at low income levels. So the finer details will be worked out in terms of whether it's subsidy at the purchase price from us buying bulk, or whether it's actually for them buying through retailers. But the idea is to set aside that funding to help people at lower end of socioeconomic scale. Digital television, as you know, gives a lot more access to channels, etc.
It would seem like it's a bit frivolous. I mean, the entire manifesto is talking about basic issues, bread and butter, development issues, employment, helping farmers, and starting a business, and then buying set-top boxes for people. It seems a bit extreme.
No, it's not frivolous at all, Dedwin. Digital television gives you access to internet at faster speeds. It also ensures you're able to access, for example, internet on your screens. And you see, the access to information technology, many people have said, is a great equalizer. But it can also be the great disequalizer, if you can say that. Because, let me tell you why, with mobile phones now coming in, mobile phone rates, for example, just a few years ago was 99 cents or 95 cents a unit. Today at peak period it's 24 cents a unit. People have 7-up, 5-up. The young people at home do not necessarily understand this. They've just got their mobile phones. You could never dream of having 7-up. The rate at which you text messages now has brought down the cost of business. But, can you imagine a person today who does not have a mobile phone is kind of missed out from everybody else. A person now, for example, is a mobile phone, and this is why we, for example, reduce the duty on smartphones, can access data. So a person, a fisherman, a villager who's caught some fish in Yasawa, he knows beforehand now, where do I go to get the best price for my fish? In the same way, digital television gives us access to data and information that you don't necessarily, have to access this through your mobile phone. You can access it through your home. So it is a great equalizer. It is not frivolous at all. In the same way, for example, it ensures that everybody has access to technology. The kids, for example, can do distance learning. So it frees up the spectrum. So it is, in fact, a very, very essential item. So bringing us into the 21st century and giving people access to technology. There's wonderful things you can do through digital television.
Who will manage digital TV?
Well, digital television, as you know, that we've got a plan. Government obviously can manage that through a different entity, whether it's FBC or some other government entity. We are looking at providing the best rate of investment return, and obviously the government is not in the business of setting up another company per se. So you can look at government-owned entities that can manage the whole allocation of the various spectrum and regarding digital television, but it will need to be an independent company.
Mr. Syed Qayyum, you've got in your manifesto $5 million allocated for farmers to prepare land for cultivation, and on top of that you've got $2 million for immediate relief for farmers who need drainage assistance. But if sugarcane farmers watching the program tonight, they may ask, there's nothing in the manifesto for the sugarcane farmers.
Well, actually there is. You don't, when you say farmers, does not mean non-sugarcane farmers. Obviously there are drainage issues everywhere. Sugarcane farmers also face that. So, you go to some of the areas, for example, up in Lambasa, past Lambasa, I forget the specific name of the place, but we've been there, where there's actually issues with the seawater coming in through the drainage system. So this is to prevent or mitigate those type of risks. So it is there for sugarcane farmers. Also, if you look in the manifesto, we talk about the fertilizers and having the synergy between the fertilizer company, FSC, and various other organizations to get the best delivery for farmers in terms of mitigating their costs for fertilizers. So all of that is there. And when we say farmers, obviously land preparation is also for farming, cane farmers too. But there are also other types of farming that we need to encourage, including dalo farming, ginger farming. There is in certain areas, some people, some farmers who've been cane farmers, they've shifted away from cane farming. They want to go into other types of farming. So they'll also be given assistance. But there's still people who are doing cane farming. So they'll be assisted also. So farmers includes, of course, cane farmers.
Now, with that, we will take another break. We'll come back for our last segment of this evening's show. Welcome back to the final segment of tonight's show of For the Record. In studio with us in Nandi is the General Secretary of Fiji First, Mr. Syed Qayyum. Mr. Syed Qayyum, as we draw to the close of the show tonight, there is another section in the manifesto that's of interest to me, the 2014 Ministry of Anti-Corruption's LTA report. Fiji First will implement the recommendations of said report, addresses inefficiency, corruption, and road user levy, wheel tax, bureaucracy, and inconsistency. LTA has been getting it left, right, and center. From your political opponents, from motorists, people have a lot of distaste towards LTA. Is that why you felt it necessary to mention this in the manifesto?
No. It's in fact, as you know, that we started the public consultations nearly beginning of the year. This year, we went around all of Fiji. We've had consultations, Suva, Singatoka, Nandi, Latoka, Mba, Nasinu, Nasori, Raki, Lambasa, Sabu. So it's an ongoing. In fact, ideally, we should have had the report issued to the public a lot earlier, but it did take some time to write it up, and obviously there are other things that are happening too. But this report actually does highlight a number of fundamental issues pertaining to LTA. It initially started off by a lot of complaints that we had received, in particular through the Ministry of Anti-Corruption, regarding things like mismanagement or inconsistency in decision-making processes, whether it was issuance of taxi permits, whether it was to do with the base allocation. We also included municipal councils in that too. and whether it was the manner in which fines were levied. So it is a very significant issue. As you know, land transportation affects everybody. Most people are motorists in Fiji, whether you're a truck driver or you're an individual car driver. So it is very much part and parcel of our ongoing issue and affects a lot of people. That is why it is mentioned there. And in fact, we already have a draft report. It's making a number of recommendations in it, and that will be put into practice.
What does it say about corruption and inefficiency at LTA?
Well, obviously that there are issues of corruption, there are issues of inefficiency. The issue is how do you address it? How do you solve it? Sometimes you see, in the same way, for example, when the Bainimarama government was appointed, we immediately had reduced the penalty for not wearing a seat belt and the initial fine for speeding, when you break the first limit level. It started off at $80. Now when you looked into the history of it, that particular law was brought in by the previous governments from Australia. I think it was specifically from Queensland. So the penalty units were in fact just transferred from Australia into Fiji. So when you have a country where you have, for example, $80 fine for not wearing a seat belt, and the average weekly wages may be $250 or $300, $80 is not that high a percentage. But in a country where at that time people were earning on average of $120, $150, obviously $80 is nearly half or more than half of the chunk of your funds. So that actually can lead to corruption, because the person booking you knows you probably can't afford it, and the person who is being booked knows that if I pay this fine, I might not be able to put a meal on the table. So people get desperate. So they say, hey, I'll give you $20, let me go. So your laws also need to be cognizant of the situation in which it is being developed. So you need to be responsive to the community needs also. That's why it was reduced to $40. So in the same way, we looked at many aspects, for example, of the LTA regulations and the laws that have been put in place. The other issue is, for example, with taxis. Now, if you want to operate a taxi in Nandi, you have to get a taxi base permit from the municipal council. And then you get a taxi permit from LTA. You have a situation sometimes where the taxi base is issued, the permit, but you don't have the license. Or they'll say, we'll give you the license, but you go and get a base, and you don't get a base. So people are kind of left in a quandary, not knowing what to do. So people get desperate. They may have bought their taxi because they know they're given a license, but they don't get a base, so somebody gets paid off. They're the kind of things we're looking at. So maybe the way to regulate it, or bases, there's one proposal. I'm not saying it is the proposal. Whether you make bases not to be named under a particular individual taxi owner. You have a set number of bases in a municipality. First come, first served basis, they use it. And the others can drive around with the pickup passengers. So these are the ways of looking at it. And there are many good standard practices in other countries. For example, Fiji has never had a practice where nobody's ever said, how many taxi licenses should you issue? There's some municipalities we went to where people are saying there are too many taxis. Singatoka had this major complaint. Something like 50 or 70 taxi permits have been issued. They're saying it's too many taxis for a small town. So should there be, for example, a ratio? Should we say there should be, for every 200 people, there should be one taxi? If that is the formula you're going to use, a town of 250 or 1,000 people will therefore have 4 taxis. That's the way it should be. There's no science, there's no formula, there's no transparent basis on doing that. The other issue is who should get a taxi license? A lot of taxi drivers said, I've been driving a taxi for 15, 20 years. I've been applying, but I don't get a taxi license, but the guy who owns a supermarket, he's got taxi licenses. So should the rich get it? Should the poor get it? Should there be incomes test to it? There are many people who see a minibus license or a taxi as a means to living. So a lot of widows will say, can I please get one? So because my husband died, I need a source of living. So these are the very fundamental issues we have addressed in the review. Some of it needs a bit more work, but that's what will be addressed.
All right. The section on LTA is quite general. My question is Fiji First proposing a decrease in the road user levy and wheel tax? And what do you mean by liberalizing certain aspects of LTA services?
Okay, in terms of road user levy and wheel tax, you'll have to wait for the report. We're making certain recommendations. It won't be prudent for me to say it will be reduced or increased or whatever it is. But most definitely it won't be increased. We believe there are certain sections of the road users that should be exempt from certain areas of paying levies. Even in terms of wheel taxes, for example, there are certain vehicles that have not been on the road for 3-4 years because the person perhaps could not afford the part. And now he can afford the part and has fixed up the car, brought it up now for approval by LTA. What LTA is saying, you have to pay for the past 3-4 years even though the car was not on the road. So should there be a provision looked at in terms of how we can fix it up? Should we look at an amnesty? There's certain things, I'm not preempting it, but I don't want to get into that area too much. But liberalizing is what we're talking about is this. At the moment, we have found, for example, that if you wanted to run a rental car company, LTA actually has to approve whether you can run a rental car company. And LTA also tells you how many rental cars you can have in your rental car company. That really should be left more to the open market. It's more like saying to somebody, we should decide how many takeaway shops there should be in Suva or in Nandi. That's up to the business owner. They should decide how many, if they want to set up a takeaway shop, they get a business license, they run the takeaway shop. If it's not successful, the onus is on them because it's, it's open market. The same way we would think that rental car companies and things like hire cars, that should be left to the individual person who wants to set up a business. LTA's focus should be more on saying, is the vehicle safe or not? So liberalizing is more to that, because sometimes I think you can have over-regulation.
I'll give Chris one last question towards the end of the show, Chris, and then I might have one.
Yeah. Mr. Syed Qayyum, I mean, Fiji First is probably the richest party going into the elections in terms of the finances that you have. $1.3 million budgeted to campaign. $80,000 is going for media advertising alone. That's a significant amount of money. I know you won't declare who finances the party, but are there individuals, private organizations that?
Look, the law provides that we need to declare where we fund or how we fund our party. Obviously, individuals do donate, and that's where the law stops. It's up to the registrar of political parties to make further inquiries. But I think, you see, you also need to understand that we have actually declared the sources or our income levels. We are a new political party, so obviously we are a startup. Many political parties have been in existence; they have their own buildings, etc. But the point to note from that is all of this is this: there are some political parties, for example, we note that they are going to get their banners done, and we've had people, for example, who are doing banners for us, and political parties have turned up to those businesses with cash, right? Are they actually declaring that in their source of income? In fact, if you look at the advertising of some of the political parties, you would actually begin to wonder how they're funding it with the level of declaration that they've made. You need to also think about that. I can go and do a false declaration. A political party can do a false declaration. Fiji First has not made a false declaration. So if you look at our advertising that we spend with FBC, Fiji TV, CFL, all of that can be accounted for. Our bank accounts there. We're the only political party with a TIN number.
All right. Last question. I've just done a rough calculation, a very quick calculation of all the measures and initiatives that's listed in the manifesto. It comes to about $48.5 million promised to voters. Does Fiji First have a plan on where this money is going to come from? I've asked this question of anyone who's appeared on my show, anyone who's brought their manifesto and promised to do this or promised to do that, and I pose the same question to you.
The economy is growing at a much faster rate. The economy is now 4.6%. When the economy grows at a much faster rate, you obviously know the government revenue increases. We've been managing our finances in a very prudent manner. We have been now identifying debts, for example, government debts, where previous governments had borrowed. They may have borrowed at 8%, borrowed at 6% here, 9% there. We are now identifying those debts because the interest rates are low, so we refinance those debts so that interest rates that are much lower than that. So in that way, we're actually making a savings on our interest payments. So the government is running the finances in a very prudent manner. $40 million in terms of the revenue collection will obviously increase next year because the economy is growing. So we're able to manage those costs. You'll also see, for example, that we are reforming the civil service. Reforming the civil service also means that you're able to bring about greater efficiencies. When you bring about greater efficiencies, we also we are able to bring about reduced costs in your operational costs. So yes, most definitely. I mean, it is the most responsible manifesto. If you did the calculations in some of the other areas, for example, one of the political parties I saw that talking about LTA, they said all the enforcement will be done by the police force. Now that will place an additional burden on police force who's going to go after the thieves and the robbers? They're going to be doing full-time job, doing enforcement of LTA. What are you going to do with LTA? So I think the point is that as far as we are concerned, the manifesto has the capacity to be able to have those items we've listed to be funded by government revenue. Government revenue is increasing. It will continue to increase. Our revenue collection is a lot better than it was ever before. FERCA is actually going over budget in terms of revenue collections.
Mr. Syed Qayyum, thank you very much for coming on For the Record tonight. Chris, thank you for being on the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.